and welcome to Insights on Demand. I'm Brad Bawtinheimer.
And I'm Ricardo Morales.
I'm the Senior Academic Consultant for Cambridge, based here in Mexico.
And I'm the Academic Services Manager for Cambridge University Press, based here in Mexico too. Hi, Brad. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you too, Ricardo. Unfortunately, we can't be in the same room or building, but it's great to see you virtually, at least for the next few minutes, as we talk about the Cambridge Learner Corpus. We'll be talking about what it is, why it's important for us as teachers, and how we can use it to our advantage, and what kind of information it gives us about our students and what they do really well in, and what areas maybe they need a little bit of extra push in. But before you and I go further, Ricardo, I'm going to hand it over to the team at Cambridge, and they're going to give us a little bit more information on what the corpus is, where they get all this information, and then we'll build on that as we go. So we'll watch the video, and we'll be back in a second.
Great.
Imagine you had a question about language. Perhaps you could ask your friend, but what if their answer was different to yours? Maybe you could ask everyone in your town, or maybe you could ask everyone in your country. This is the basis of corpus linguistics. We analyse huge collections of language to find out how it behaves and how it works.
We use the corpus in two ways. So first, to find out how English is really used, and second, to find out the language support that our learners really need.
So we've got a huge range of things, going from informal family conversations around the dinner table to academic writing, to business English, to journalism, to text messages and emails, and all this allows us to have a really detailed understanding of how English behaves in lots of different contexts.
So much has changed in the world over the last 10 years, and that includes language, so we keep checking to make sure that our syllabus and our course materials is up to date to reflect those changes.
The Cambridge Learner Corpus is an unparalleled collection of learner writing.
Made up of about 180,000 real exam candidate scripts from about 200 countries around the world.
And this analysis gives us insight into how well the students perform, but also the support they need to improve.
We use the corpus to supply the language that learners need to fulfil their ambitions and potential.
Okay, Brad, so as we heard in the video, the Cambridge Learner Corpus is a huge collection of language and text, and it's something that we can analyze to find out how language behaves. It's about data and evidence, and it informs us on how students' learning path is. It gathers over 55 million words, which is a large number of words, and it all comes from the Cambridge exams. So it's this collection of information that tells us what learners do, but also what learners might need. So it's a powerful tool to inform our course books and many other things. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how it is used and what information it comes from?
Well, yeah, Ricardo, you talked about size. So first of all, it's unique because of its size, because you mentioned 55 million words. That's enormous in itself. But in addition to that, it's unique because of the annotation scheme. So the exam scripts in the corpus have been error coded. A team of specialists have worked through each text and annotated any errors with computer readable tags. So that means that you can search for very specific things, and we can decide, or we know for sure, okay, so this particular person in this country struggles with this based upon what their first language is. This person struggles with this. This person excels at this. We know, for example, which we'll learn a little bit more about in a second, certain errors that Mexican learners make and certain errors that everyone makes, etc. So this is really, really important to help teachers know where to focus on in their classes. And it all comes from, you can see here also on the screen, all of the different exams we do across the world. But all of that goes into a database. And based on that, we have the Cambridge Learner Corpus.
Okay, That's really interesting, Brad. And it's interesting to find what languages do our learners speak. So as you can see here, we have learners from different backgrounds, learners that use different languages. And what's interesting to mention is that there in the corpus, there are over 3 million words from Mexican learners. And remember how many words I mentioned in the previous slide that the corpus has?
Well, yeah, you mentioned 55 million. So here, 3 million of those are just from Mexican learners. So out of all of the different languages in the world, 3 million and countries, 3 million are just from Mexican learners. So we have a pretty extensive database on Mexican learners.
And I think there are very interesting insights. So why don't we take a look at them and we will see. Okay.
For sure. Well, we're going to look at Mexican learners in two different ways. We're going to look at what they do really well at, and then a few things that they possibly struggle with and the types of errors they make. So Ricardo, let's start with what is relatively, and we have that in quotes there, easy about learning English for Mexican learners.
Well, first of all, there are similarities between English and Spanish, because English borrowed into many other different languages. So that's why you find some words that are similar. Sometimes the meaning is different, yes, but the way words are constructed often appear to be similar. And that also has to do with the morphology, the way the symbols, the way language is or a word is written. It's very similar. We share that kind of language and those kind of symbols, opposite to other languages, let's say Russian or Chinese, in which symbols are completely different. So that's an advantage as well. And we can say that Mexican learners make relatively fewer missing determiner errors, also missing preposition errors, missing verb errors. So we're good at that. But we also have other kind of evidence that the corpus shows. So why don't we go into more detail into those, Brad?
Yes, for sure. Well, I want to focus on a few of the errors that are distinctive to Mexican learners. So here we see a number of different things, spelling, some different specific examples, including countability, etc. So for example, in American English spellings, the words color or practice, those are common mistakes that we see. Also here, if we look at the meet us and meet someday, sometimes there's a difference between the number of arguments verb takes, and we have meet us instead of meet. And we think this comes probably from some type of Spanish interference with encontrarnos. Also with non-countable nouns, we have a homework, where we need a piece of homework. The verb cost, for example, can be both present or past. And this seems to cause confusion because sometimes we need to add the S ending for cost. So those are a few examples that we can look at. But let's go into grammar. And I know a lot of us today, or probably a lot of people watching today, love grammar. So Ricardo, tell us about some of the specific grammar errors that are made by Mexican learners.
Some of them would include, for example, missing pronouns like it or you. Yeah. An example could be, as you know, is queen size instead of it is queen size. So the missing pronoun is there. I'm writing to tell how my birthday was instead of I'm writing to tell you how my birthday was. Also, and I think this is really challenging, the use of the and the missing the, right? So sometimes Mexican learners add it, sometimes omit it. And that's a little bit challenging sometimes because there's not a specific rule. Well, even though there are rules, it's not always a very clear rule on how to use it. So they could say, for example, please prepare all information instead of prepare all the information. Or nowadays, the fashion, where that should not be included. So it's a little bit challenging, as I said. And another aspect that is related to grammar is the wrong word order in relative clauses or in indirect questions. For example, they get to say ask how are you, instead of saying ask how you are. So these are some of the typical errors made by Mexican learners. And I think that's really interesting. There's more to show, right? It's not only to Mexicans, it's to many users of different languages, but this is particularly noticeable in Mexican learners.
Yeah, and some other ones here. A major error, major is the wrong preposition. This tends to be part of a phrase or chunk which needs to be learned separately. So here we see in used instead of at. So it says here, you can't park your car. Instead of in, we have to say at our company office. Obviously, Ricardo, I'm sure you'd have a problem if I parked my car in the office. I'm not even sure how to get my car up to the office. That would be very difficult. So confusion between on and in. I hope to see you in the holidays instead of on the holidays. There's a large window on the left instead of in the left. So we have those common errors there as well.
I struggle a lot with those, Brad, as well,
yes,
right? Yeah,
well,
and it's really common to find them.
Well, and you mentioned something on the previous slide about rules, and there are rules, but then there's always exceptions to the exception to the exception to the exception. And I know sometimes trying to explain that to students, it's really challenging because it is hard to remember all of the exceptions to the exceptions to the exceptions. Another error is a wrong tense of verb. These errors can be part of several patterns, including modal verbs, reported speech, conditionals, or composite tenses like the past perfect. Here we look at the overuse of present tense in favor of past tense, and also instead of the would in the phrase would like. So let's go into vocabulary errors made by Mexican learners. Tell us what we see here, Ricardo.
Well, that's interesting, because when it comes to vocabulary, there's a wrong choice of verb, right? The misuse of the verb, instead of using come to my house or please come to my house, it's like please go to my house. See and watch when it comes to TV, right? So you can watch TV, but students tend to use see TV. People need to use formal clothes instead of wear formal clothes, and that's because in Spanish there's not a really a big difference on how this works. We have one word for each one of these words, so that's hard for students to identify sometimes. We also have the wrong choice of noun, right? Same happens here, using hour instead of time. What's the time of the flight, for example? I'm sorry, but I can leave job instead of work, or I need to clean my home instead of house. And that is because there are no big differences in Spanish in those words. So it's hard for students sometimes to identify why this comes from a subtle difference.
Okay, well, interesting. And yeah, you're right. I think there is that Spanish interference there for sure. And then some other vocabulary errors made by Mexican learners here include choice of adjectives. So a lot of these have to do with saying that we are doing well, and overuse of fine or good. And to be honest, Ricardo, you and I were talking about this morning, a lot of native speakers overuse good and fine also. So this is not, this is definitely not unique only to Mexican learners. Also here, the use of funny or fun. So funny is often used instead of fun. And this may be because of Spanish divertido, which can mean both of them. We also see confusion between endings, ing and ed. And we need to remember that the thing ends with ing and the person ends with ed. So something is exciting and someone is excited. Also works with interesting and boring, for example. Finally, for vocab choice, we look at adverbs, which in English often end in ly, but not necessarily. Again, there's those exceptions. Spanish speakers sometimes put an E sound before the S plus consonant. I hear that a lot. So using specially instead of especially may be overcompensation for this. With adverbs, there can be a subtle difference between the use of, for example, so and very. So those are some interesting examples there. And that we see actually quite commonplace. And I hear those from my students quite a bit, actually. Okay,
Right.
go ahead,
And
Ricardo.
and perhaps people who are participating in this session might identify these errors. So maybe, and if they find other errors that are common to Mexican learners, maybe they can type them in the chat so we can take a look at them, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And but Brad, what do these words have in common? The words that you see here in the pictures. Is there anything that you find that they have in common? What would that be?
Well, Ricardo, these are among the top 25 words most frequently misspelled by Mexican learners. And again, you and I, we had a long conversation about this morning, and I was pointing out some of them that even for native speakers of English, the word accommodation and environment, I've seen many adults who have, many years of education still struggle sometimes with those words. For example, the accommodation is at 1C, 2C, 1M, 2Ms, and the environment, they will often forget the N as well. And even the word beautiful, I especially younger, maybe teenagers and maybe college age, where maybe sometimes they forget, they think that the word beautiful is part of the word full with 2 L's, and so they get confused there. So the reason for sharing that is if you have problems with these words, you're not alone. But this is important to know. These are top 25 words most frequently misspelled.
Right.
So Ricardo.
Let's say, so Brad, does that mean that our learners are so different?
No. Okay. And it's true. Our learners are not so different. Here, you look at this particular slide here, and you see a lot of different errors that we're talking about here. And these are 10 common errors that Mexican learners make. However, these 10 error type features in the top 20 of errors made by all learners everywhere. That's why, in answer to your question, are we different, the same? Well, in a nutshell, no, because there's a lot of similarities throughout. There are distinctive things that we pointed out on other slides, but again, these are 10 out of the top 20 for learners everywhere. So Ricardo, I have a question for you. Why is English so difficult?
Well, if it is difficult because many different aspects, right? One of them has to do with spelling. And you have noticed, Brad, that in Spanish, many words or most of the words that you pronounce, you pronounce all the letters in one word.
Yeah.
Opposite to English, in which you find some letters that are not pronounced. So that's sometimes challenging for learners, right? It's hard to predict that some words are not spelled as they sound. Yeah. So you have, for example, though, through, thorough, both. So there are different ways to pronounce those words and to spell sometimes. There's also about rules. You also mentioned something about that there are many rules, and a lot of rules are needed. But what happens when there are exceptions to these rules? And that's sometimes confusing to students. Sometimes they say, well, if I apply the rule, then here I would get the right spelling of a word. But often it's not the case. So there are many exceptions. And that also has to do with large vocabulary, including a lot of phrases and idioms. And this is prevalent mostly to higher level students, in which perhaps they have less grammatical errors, but they still have some words that are fossilized, and it's hard for them to get rid of those words. So that's why, in a nutshell, why we would say, like, well, English is difficult at some stages, don't you think?
Yeah, and again, you went back to rules and the exceptions, and I love rules too. It helps us explain things, but especially, I think when we talk about exceptions, Ricardo, those will be more applied to higher level students. That's when we start to see the bigger differences or the more exceptions that we see in our classrooms. Sorry, go ahead, Ricardo.
No. I was hoping that you would give us more reasons for exceptions,
right?
Right?
Yeah, for sure. in addition to, I mean, on top of everything you just said, we also have worldwide variation. So in addition to British English and American English, then we also have variations upon the variations upon the variations. So in Canada, where I'm from, we have some Canadianisms and some different things that we do differently in Canada, England, Scotland, Ireland, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, etc. India, so, where second language use, and there's many, many, many differences within that. One example, just a very easy example, just to share with everyone today, is the word been. So when used in like the past participle, or used when I'm using a sentence where I have been here or have you been somewhere,
Okay.
when you use a sentence like that, in Canada, we pronounce it been, but in the United States, they pronounce it been. Right? So I remember once I got into a debate. I was taking a course with someone from the United States, and she disagreed with me on how I pronounced it. And I went to the dictionary and I showed her, look, this is what we do in Canada and the UK. And she's like, no, it's still wrong. I'm like, no, I swear. And she wasn't open-minded like we are, Ricardo. So here,
that's the worldwide variation, right?
right?
So,
no,
it
exactly,
comes from
exactly.
different places,
100%.
different backgrounds. Interesting.
And you mentioned this a little bit about the word the. So it's hard for languages that don't have the definite article. Pronunciation of the TH sound, the R sound, the schwa sound, for example. One example I love giving to my students is the sentence, what would you like? So when I say that sentence, separate, what would you like? There's no schwa, right? In that sense. But all of a sudden, when I put it together very quickly, what would you like? You've added the schwa in there, and it changes a lot. Number one, the pronunciation, but also the way students hear it. So all of a sudden, a student who's never heard that before in their life, they're hearing that sound and they are like, what? Right?
Yeah.
And also to be able to sound more fluent, to be able to put that together.
Right.
So that can be a struggle.
Because the schwa does not really exist in Spanish. We need to make it up at some point, right? So it's hard for us to have the right pronunciation. That's a very good point, Brad.
Okay, good. So yeah, again, we could go on. I'm sure you and I could go on for hours discussing this, but we're on a very limited time schedule. So Ricardo, what can we do with corpus data?
Well, that's a very interesting question. That's a really good point. The Cambridge Learner Corpus appears everywhere in our course books. All the course books produced by Cambridge University Press, well, include the Cambridge Learner Corpus. Sometimes you find it evident in the page. This is this example, for example, it says accuracy check. You find it in one of our series, Evolve, and it helps learners identify what the exact way to use a phrase is. And this helps preventing some fossilization of words. But that doesn't mean that you will find pages like this with lots of corpus information. It also supports on the production of course books, which is the grammar of choice to be used, what vocabulary should be used to help students have the right language that they would need to excel in the use of language. So as you can see, it's used everywhere in our course books, and I think that's a really powerful tool. What do you think, Brad?
No, for sure. And here I wanted to show everyone an example here. So you see on this slide, on the left, this is kind of a bar graph of the data. And so they've charted out here some problems that they see with certain prepositions, right? We talked about prepositions a few minutes ago. So you can see here the number of instances that error appeared. So based upon that information, they're able to say, okay, well, this seems to be something that we need to give students more support on, or we need to just kind of give the teacher a hint and say, you know what, this is what's coming up in our data. This is what we suggest you spend a little bit of extra time on with your students in classes. So that on the left, that's the data. And on the right, that's how it actually goes into the book. And you can see, Ricardo, that little symbol at the right next to number one, that's the Cambridge Learner Corpus logo. So whenever you see that, you know that's important. Don't skip it. Don't go over it. Look at it, because that's based on real data on everything we've been sharing with you today.
Okay.
So Ricardo, how can we use corporate to support teachers in learning?
Well, there are many different ways to do it. We are running out of time, but maybe it would be interesting to invite our participants in this session to take a look at Dr. Niall Curry's a presentation on how to use tools to work with corpora. But we also, in this event, we also have a number of talks like in regards to spoken English, to language change, EML, and so many others. So please check them in the Insights on Demand event.
Perfect. No, and that's great, Ricardo. I know a lot of teachers they love this real academic stuff, and this is what this event is all about. So take advantage of it. To everyone watching today, watch as many as you can, because there's a lot of great information. And then please, any comments or questions, please post them here. So you have the web on the Padlet. So you have the website there for the exact link to the Padlet, padlet.com/CUPELT Insights on Demand. Or if you have your phone handy, you can scan the barcode that you see, and it'll take you directly to there. So Ricardo, we've come to the end. That was very quick, but I really enjoyed sharing that moment with you, and also being able to share our knowledge about the corpus.
It's been really nice and really insightful in many different ways, Brad. So it was nice being in this presentation with you. So I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.